Gus T Renegade, Justice, the Cows, in for another program to share constructive information on racism, what it is, and how it works. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into the broadcast. Hope you are getting helpful information. Again, I am very much opposed to wasting time. We have way too many problems. Things are just too serious for us to be wasting time. So if you're not getting useful information tuning into this program, please check elsewhere. This was a suggestion, our guest for today's program. I hope people have been appreciative. I have been making an effort to try to field as many of the requests as I possibly can that I get from different listeners and investors. This person is an investor, and she wanted our guest for today's program. I believe she had already read the book, so she was really excited about hearing his views. And contacted him. Not only did I get a book, I got an autographed copy. I hope you all will really enjoy the discussion. Our guest, he has written dozens of books on all kinds of topics. He's written a lot of science fiction, some of the titles of his different books. And you can check out all of his work if you're interested. His website is linked in the description for this program. You can just click his name. It'll take you to the website where you can get more information about his books. And if you want to purchase anything, you can do that as well. But some of his books, in addition to the one that we're going to talk about today, Alien, Infection, scrolling through some of the different titles here, just so you can get an idea of the variety of his work. Let's see, we have Strange Valley, Human by Choice. I'll give you a little snippet of this one. Human by Choice, best-selling science fiction print author Travis S. Dock and best-selling author, our guest for today, have combined their talents to produce new science fiction thriller. Several alien lifeboats make it to Earth in widely separated spots after their interstellar spaceship malfunctions. One of the aliens comes down near the home of Kyle Leverson, a former Army intelligence officer and now a widowed science journalist. The aliens think they can never go home, but they are able to convert their bodies into duplicates of human beings over a period of time. Kyle helps the alien during the process as it becomes a human female, yet retains its previous knowledge and abilities, including a powerful perceptive sense unlike anything known to humans. Very interesting. There's more, but that's one of his other titles. Several others. They Factor, that's another title. He's got tons of stuff. You can go to his website and check it out. The book that we're going to discuss today, also a science fiction thriller, The Melanin Apocalypse. This book, very interesting. Give you the quick one-sentence synopsis. A man-made virus is killing all the blacks in the world. One-sentence synopsis of The Melanin Apocalypse. Real pleasure to have the author on the program with us today. Joining us live, Mr. Darrell Bain. Mr. Bain, are you with us, sir?
Gus, I'm very glad to be here.
Outstanding. We are appreciative of you sharing a bit of your Sunday afternoon with us. I guess for folks who haven't read some of your award-winning fiction, could you give us a little bit of background information about who you are, just so folks have a better idea of who we're speaking with?
Yes, I certainly could. I'm in my very early 70s right now. I've been writing about 20 years. I started rather late in life, and I write a variety of books, including humor and suspense, science fiction, and some nonfiction. I prefer science fiction simply because it allows a much greater range of exploring human behavior and associations and so forth. You can go much further with science fiction than you can with something contemporary. Now, the Melanin Apocalypse takes place in the very near future. And I might take a moment here to mention that after I wrote this book, where the genetic viruses were being used for genocide in a particular segment of the human race, I decided I would write and sort of an antithesis to this book, which takes place further into the future, where colored people are on top of the heap and whites are little better than slaves. The title of that was White Odyssey. But of course today we're talking about the Melanin Apocalypse. And I had this was a difficult book to write, simply because it's a very controversial subject to begin with, of course, and I had to get into some themes that some people take the wrong way and some people are uncomfortable with, but yet this is a very real possibility, and I thought that it should be told. Now, I write fiction, and especially science fiction, because, as I said, you can have more range in this particular genre. I sort of lost my train of thought right there, but
okay, no worries. I have some questions I want to ask about the book, so yeah, we'll be able to get more specific into what you wrote. For people who haven't visited your website, and the address for the website is DarrellBain.com, and that is D as in
correct.
dugout.
DarrellBain. DarrellBain.com will take you right to it and show you all of my books, including the Melanin Apocalypse. And by the way, the train of thought that I lost, the idea for this book, actually, not the idea, but the impetus, I should say, came from my younger brother, who's a very interesting character in his own right. But he sent me an article that opens the book. He knows I'm interested in science and read a great deal of science, and he thought that might be a good idea for a book for me. So if you don't mind, I'd like to read this little excerpt from the article. Is that all right?
Oh, please do. Please do.
Okay. Scientists have declared that in 10 years they will succeed in creating a radically new type of biological weapon. This weapon would be capable of infecting people according to a genetically predetermined marker, such as skin color or eye shape. Infection could have a delayed effect or only begin once a certain type of medicine was taken. A recent closed seminar held by the CIA, and I skip a little bit right here and go on, the most terrifying new possibility is the hypothetical biological weapon that could infect people according to genetic markers. Not only would it allow for genocide, it would be created specifically for that purpose. A recent report by the British Medical Association stated that the rapid progress in genetics could become the basis for ethnic cleansing on an unheard of scale in the near future. Now, that's an excerpt from an article titled Gateway to Russia, written in March 2004 by Vasily Sychev, S-Y-C-H-E-V. Now, my brother sent that article to me. He said, he knows I read a lot about science. I'm not a scientist, but I have always been interested in science, and I read all different types of science. At any rate, when I got that article, I immediately said to myself, this would make a great subject for a book. And also, I thought that a book should be written simply because this is such a dangerous subject, and it's entirely possible that it will be possible to do what the article said in the very near future. So the book was written partially as a warning, okay? A warning to the leaders of our country and the leaders of other countries, as far as that goes, so that they could start taking precautions against such a thing. Now, I used fiction simply because with fiction, you can really get into the characters' minds. You can do things in fiction that you can't do in nonfiction. And you can create drama and horror, if you like. Genocide is certainly horrible. At any rate, I did it as a fictional book. And not only did I write about this virus infecting blacks, I also included in the book a similar virus infecting Arabs of a certain region of the Middle East. So you see, this could go just a whole lot of different ways. And as I said, this book is sort of a warning about what can happen. Okay?
Real interesting. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And looking forward, I have quite a few questions. I'm looking forward to getting into the book. Before we proceed, I wanted to check for folks who are listening. If they have not seen you, you are a white man. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I have a little bit of Cherokee Indian in my ancestry, but essentially, yes, I'm a Caucasian.
Okay. And this program, the COWS, Context of White Supremacy, I have unfortunately concluded that we are in a global system dominated by racism, white supremacy. I use those two terms as synonyms, and I have the exact same definition for both terms. That definition is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you believe that such a system exists, and do you think that definition is accurate?
It's accurate so far as it goes, and certainly some white supremacist groups exist, but I might mention here that when people think of prejudice, when they think of racial prejudice, that's not the only type of prejudice at all. As a matter of fact, religious prejudice is much more prevalent than racial prejudice. And there's all kinds of different prejudices. However, this program
I just want to be clear
into racial prejudice.
Yes.
Now,
I want to clarify that for my listeners. I'm not talking
certainly
about prejudice. I haven't used the term prejudice. I'm talking about a system of power where the entire collective white population has more power and works to maintain power over the entire global non-white population. I'm not talking about, prejudice. And I have concluded that this system of racism, white supremacy dominates everything. Nothing is more important than this system of racism, white supremacy. This is top priority for the white people who practice this. So I've concluded this beats everything. I just want to be very clear about my position that I've taken on this.
Okay, that's quite all right. I can't say I completely agree with you, but certainly there's a lot in what you say.
Okay. My co-host.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Did you want to say something?
I can get into it a little bit later.
Okay. Yeah, I don't want to stop you from sharing. I definitely want to hear, what you have to say. And I know listeners, they do as well. My co-host, she is also with us, Justice. I believe she might have some questions for you as well. Justice, if you have some questions for Mr. Bain, your line is open. Please go right ahead.
Before I ask my questions to the guest, Gus, so far, do you suspect the guest is practicing racism, white supremacy?
Excuse me, could you repeat that?
Very possible, yes.
Okay, thank you. Now my questions for the rest are for the guest. What do you mean when you say prejudice?
That's a very, very complicated subject. You'd really have to start out with the origin of prejudice. And I believe personally that it's part of our evolution. And at one time far back in history, it must have had a survival factor for it to endure so well. Now, I don't believe it's nearly as important today as a survival factor, if it's a survival factor at all.
All I want is just a definition of what you mean by it.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
All I want is just a definition of what you mean when you say prejudice. That's all I need.
Okay, I've got you. Prejudice, in my opinion, is the feeling of an individual or a group that they're superior to other individuals of groups of many different kinds, actually. And as I say, I believe this is originated as part of our evolution as human beings. Anywhere people were exploring, when the New World was opened up and parts of the Old World were even being opened up, people who had no contact with strangers, anytime anybody else came, they thought almost immediately, strangers are dangerous, drive them away, kill them, make slaves of them. And every indigenous group anywhere back in those days thought of themselves as the people, and all others were barbarians or unworthy of notice. And you can still see that today, say like in China, where anybody except the Chinese is considered what they call a Gaijin, I believe the term is, non-Chinese, and they're inferior to the Chinese. That's a pretty prevalent opinion in China. Now, I can also say here that prejudice can be changed to an extent by culture and association. Now, not always, but let me give you a real good example from my personal experience. My wife and I spent a year in Saudi Arabia, and when we were there, we realized that the Muslim Arabs have a completely different mindset than we do. We couldn't understand it, as a matter of fact. We were supposed to work there for 2 years, and we finally had to come home after a year because not that I couldn't get along with anybody over there. I couldn't understand them. Neither could my wife, especially the way women were treated. So sometimes these things can be changed by culture and by association, but not always. Okay?
Okay. On the cover of your books, The Y Factor and Oops, what do those pictures say about racism, white supremacy?
I'm sorry, our accents are a little bit different, and sometimes I'm having trouble understanding your questions. Could you repeat it again, please? And I'm sorry.
On the cover of your books, The Y Factor and Oops, what do those pictures say about racism, white supremacy?
Well, the picture on the title of the book shows a black man in extreme agony, and I had nothing at all to do with the cover, mind you. So I don't know what the artist was thinking about, but when I look at it, it's just part of the book where this represents a very sick or dying black man who's been infected by the virus. That's all.
Is this the Y Factor? Is that the one you're talking about?
No. This is the Melanin Apocalypse.
Oh, okay. I thought you said, I'm sorry. Okay.
I was talking about the Y Factor and Oops.
Oh, okay. Well, that's an entirely different book, and here we're dealing with aliens. And the title of the book, The Y Factor, is simply part of the book where the aliens changing into human form, unless they're mentored by someone very carefully, the males, the aliens changing into males, don't do so well simply because of the Y chromosome, as opposed to females who have the double X chromosome, and the males have the YX. It's sort of technical sort of thing.
And what about Oops?
A lot of what?
You did not answer about Oops, your book.
What about my books?
You didn't say what does Oops say about racism, white supremacy. You only said the Y Factor.
No, the Y Factor, not the White Factor.
I said the Y.
Yeah, it really has nothing to do with prejudice as prejudice. It's simply a technical term that explains some things within the book. In other words, the male Y chromosome causes the aliens to have problems functioning as a good male, I guess I could say. They tend to go sort of crazy in the book, whereas the females don't, as a general rule.
Do you have a book called Oops?
Called what?
Do you have a book called Oops?
Oh, Oops. That's a collection.
Do you have a book called that?
Yes. Oops.
Oh, okay.
That's the title of one of the short stories within the book. And that was just a fantasy, humorous sort of thing. And there's other different stories in it. It's just a single author anthology is all that book is. However, I think there's some very, very good stories in it, if I do say so myself.
The book, Melanin Apocalypse. Why would you make a book about a man-made virus killing all black people in the world?
Well, it's not only the black people that were being killed, it was also Arabs. And I did this as a warning to our leaders that this technology is perfectly feasible in the near future. And we need to start studying ways to prevent such things. That's essentially as I stated in the book. It was written. It was written as fiction, and I hope people can enjoy it as fiction. But it's also a very good warning that we need to be on the lookout for these things, because genetics is a field that's advancing by just leaps and bounds, and the technology described in the Melanin Apocalypse is going to be feasible in just the near future. And say a group of white supremacists might actually be able to do the things that are described in the Melanin Apocalypse.
Are you a racist white supremacist?
Oh, no, I'm far from it. As a matter of fact, I'd like to read you the dedication in this book. May I? The dedication reads, "To all oppressed people of the world, anywhere and anywhen, it is my sincerest hope that the events portrayed in this novel never happen." And also in another portion of the book, I state firmly that the opinions of some of the characters in this book are in no way reflective of my own opinions. No, I am not a white supremacist by any means. However, I will say that some people apparently seem to take that attitude that I was. I had one letter from a lady that she stated baldly, "Why do you hate black people so much?" And my gosh, that was the furthest thing in my mind. I don't think she read the dedication or the acknowledgments, or sometimes I think she didn't even read the book before she wrote that letter. Because certainly this book here is a book that people can read and find just how horrible racial prejudice can be.
I knew he was going to say that. Okay. What specific book have you written that will help non-white people get constructive information to replace white supremacy with justice?
Well, the Melanin Apocalypse is one book. Now, I mentioned earlier that I wrote another book after I wrote the Melanin Apocalypse, and after I got that letter from the lady, among many other letters, by the way, I decided that I would write another book where white people were on the bottom of the heap and coloreds were running the world. And the whites were in a worse state than, say, the legal segregation of the Jim Crow South, in the last century. The White Odyssey is the title of that, and it's the antithesis of the Melanin Apocalypse. It just sort of stands it on its head and takes the opposite theme. Again, I'd like to state that I wrote this book as a warning of what will be possible in the near future. That was my main intent, and I put it in fiction so that people might enjoy a story while they're learning something. Okay?
Sure. What is your purpose of wanting racism, white supremacy here?
What is my purpose of what?
Wanting racism, white supremacy here.
I'm not sure I understand what you're talking about. What is my opinion of white supremacy? Is that what you're saying?
Why do you want racism, white supremacy here?
Oh, why do I write something like this?
No.
Is that your question?
Why do you want racism, white supremacy here?
Well, I've stated over and over again that this is a warning of what may be possible in the near future, and people should read about this and take precautions against it. That was my purpose here. Actually, I didn't have very much white supremacy as such in the book, other than the small group which instigated the virus. And by the way, no, I don't want to give the plot away, so I won't say that.
Consciously, what do you do?
I'm sorry, what?
Consciously,
I'm very sorry. I just have trouble understanding you sometimes. Could you repeat, please?
That will be all for now.
Context of white supremacy. I want listeners to kind of keep in mind, Mr. Bain shared that, his purpose for writing this book is kind of a warning of what can happen. He said, he wanted leaders to be more aware that the technology for this sort of thing, to have these designer biological weapons to attack specific groups of people, that this technology might be possible sooner than we think, and we should really pay attention to racism. This is a big problem. You said that, I guess, someone sent you a letter, and they felt that you were...
Oh, yeah. Somebody sent me a letter accusing
yes,
me
sir, saying that you were being a racist. Right. Okay. And I read your book, sir, and I think we can have a great dialogue. I think, and I am a black person, okay? And I read your book very carefully, and I took notes. I think it would be very easy. In fact, it doesn't surprise me at all that someone could read this book and conclude that the author is a racist and doesn't like black people. Now, I'm not saying that you're racist, but I could easily see how somebody could read this book and make that conclusion. And I would start on page 6, and I just want to get your thoughts on this part of the book. This is at the very beginning. The main character in this book, Doug, he's a white person. It says on page 6, this is when he's reminiscing about his childhood. He was a young child. He says, from out of the blue came another question that he didn't understand at first. Would you rather be a black man or a white man? For the first time, Doug really looked at the old, dark-skinned gardener. His shoes were split and taped. A much-used leather belt held up equally worn and patched jeans. His shirt was stained and wet with the pungent odor of dried sweat, and his cap was a shapeless mass. But what Doug noticed most was his color, and the way his face held a reservoir of old sadness that was never absent. He didn't laugh and sing and wear nice clothes like the black men he saw on television. He was very dark, almost black, and Doug remembered now that a lot of other people were dark too, like the woman who came to clean house every week or two. He thought of his playmates and how they were all white. He thought of his parents and their friends. None of them worked outside all day in the yards or mopped floors. He hung his head, ashamed, somehow, but his child's mind had no idea why. Yet he knew the answer to the black man's question. From hundreds of overheard jokes and conversations, a cultural bias had already soaked into his little mind. He didn't really want to say anything, but his parents had taught him to always answer when an adult spoke to him. White, I guess, he muttered, looking up at the old man. Me too, the black gardener replied in a soft voice. This is page, and I think this is a crucial part of the book right here at the very beginning. Can you kind of share your thoughts on this passage?
I certainly can, because this is taken directly from my childhood. This incident actually occurred, not in exactly that fashion, but I wasn't even school age then, and we lived on a dairy farm. My father ran a dairy farm before he got to drinking and gambling and so forth, and the family split up. But at any rate, he ran the dairy farm, and occasionally he had people working for him. And now I can't say for sure because, as I say, I was a child then, and I think he could have been a sharecropper for my father. He could have been just hired to help with the crops that we grew. I really don't know. But the incident actually did happen, and that was the way that I felt then. I felt something was wrong, okay? I knew something was wrong, but I was a child. I didn't know what. And somehow I felt ashamed, but I didn't know why I was ashamed. And that has stuck with me throughout my life. As a matter of fact, the first story I ever wrote and submitted for publication described that incident in much longer terms than here.
Wow. So did you grow up hearing, racist jokes and people talking bad about black people?
Oh, of course. I grew up. I was born in 1939, And I grew up in Louisiana for the first 17 years of my life in the segregated South. I couldn't have avoided that if I'd tried. I couldn't have avoided hearing all the jokes and the epithets, you know, like nigger and black ape and all those sorts of stuff. It was just it was a part of the whole culture back then. And,
wow.
I can mention something else here. Now, I'm going to get into this a little bit later because it's a book I just read. But people think the segregated South was the only place such prejudice was taking place. It wasn't. It was occurring all over the United States. It just wasn't legal outside of the Old South. But it occurred just the same.
I totally agree there. That is so fascinating that you grew up in Louisiana and that this passage, which I think is key. I think this passage right here, because it kind of sets the stage for everything that happens, and just what we think about, at least for me as a black person, how I view Doug for the remainder of the book, and really it kind of sets the tone for the whole book that is about black people being wiped off the planet. And reading this book, one of the things that I keep in mind, and I tell listeners, keep this in mind when you're watching films, when you're reading books, even when you're choosing your friends or people that you're going to have contact with. When I watch this film, when I read this book, when I talk to this person, how do they make me feel about black people? And reading this book, woo, it does not feel good to be a black person. I think almost every black character in this book is a looter, a rapist, has gold teeth. It's kind of tough to read this book with the black characters. I think the only exception is like Fridge, which is an interesting character, and I think maybe one of the general, but he died. Like the other exceptions, either they're gang leaders of some sort, or they're just they don't quite measure up. They don't quite measure up. You don't feel too bad about these folks being mistreated and killed off. How do you feel about that statement? Me being a black person, reading this book and saying, hey, you have a lot of descriptions of black people as looters, rapists, rioters, and gold teeth wearing criminals. How do you feel about that?
Well, remember now, this is fiction, and fiction is frequently exaggerated. I can see your point here, and possibly if I were going back and rewriting it, I might do a better job. I guess that's always the case when an author has written a book and later on thinks of things he should have done, should not have done, and so forth. However, in the circumstances of the book, I almost had to depict some of the blacks like that. And as an opposite, I took Fridge to show a, so to speak, normal black, and also Doug's friend, who died, by the way, from the disease. And I tried to show that he associated with blacks as his friends. And but I see your point there. Yes, it's a very good point too. And possibly I did stereotype too much there.
It's even Fridge. I think Fridge is, in many respects, I could make my case about saying, wow, I think the person who wrote this book really hates black people. I think I could use the character Fridge to make my point much better. Fridge, he's a black male in this book. He's a veteran. His wife, his family, he loses his family at the very beginning. He loses his family, grief-stricken. He joins up with some of the other black people who are rioting, looting, looking for an opportunity to rape a white woman. But he is kind of the moral force. Like, he doesn't want things to get too out of hand. He saves a white woman from being raped later on in the book. But I think even Fridge, he represents, in many respects, he represents the worst kind of racism with regards to stereotyping black characters. He is the savior. He saves June from being raped by a black male later in the book towards the end. He is the one who is, hey, this white guy, Doug, is not lying. I believe him. I know this white guy would not lie. Even though Doug has just told a lie to all these black people, he's insisting we can trust him. We can trust him. And even just his name, Fridge, he's been totally objectified as a kitchen appliance. They don't even call him by his real title. They call him Fridge. And it reminds me of the football player for the Bears.
That was, he's a big man, and that's how he got his nickname. And it's a term of affection, not derogatory. I guess I should say right here that I've told you I grew up in the segregated South, and my first contact with an integrated culture was when I joined the military at 17. Now, mind you, I had never, ever had much association with blacks up until then. And suddenly I'm put into an integrated society, and I can state honestly that I saw really nothing that bothered me at all, because I had always felt that segregation was wrong. I can tell you another little story here, if you don't mind, from my childhood. I was a little bit older in this case. Back in the Jim Crow South, when a white person was on a sidewalk, a black person had to step off of it and let the white person pass. Now, I'm sure you know that. I was, I guess, 13 probably, and I was just walking home from the library, and a black man, this nice-looking guy, saw me, a little kid, and stepped off the sidewalk to let me pass. And I can remember plainly to this day saying, now, why should that have to happen like that? That's a grown man stepping aside for a little kid. Something is wrong there.
Yeah,
but I'm not an outspoken person. You know, I kept pretty much to myself. I'm not a demonstrator or somebody who's going to get up in public and argue about things like this. But nevertheless, I knew this was wrong. And just the other day, my wife and I were talking about a book that we were reading, which I'm still going to get into a little bit later. The title of the book is The Warmth of Other Suns. Have you happened to read it? Have you read that book?
What is the title again, sir? I'm sorry.
The Warmth of Other Suns. It's history of the black migration from the South to the North and West during the years of 1915 to 1970. And I think everybody in America ought to read that book, simply because I grew up in the Jim Crow South, and I didn't realize all the horrible things that were going on. As a matter of fact, my wife had to just put the book down after about 70 pages because she couldn't stand reading about such awful things that happened then. And I grew up not even being aware of it. I mean, I was aware of segregation, actually. But I had no idea such terrible things were going on. And I think a lot of... Go ahead.
I thought you said earlier that you grew up around people who were constantly saying racist things and calling black people black apes and niggers and that sort of thing. How could you go
that
around?
Was just part of the culture of the South back then.
So how did you not know black people were being mistreated if you grew up around people saying those sorts of things all the time?
Well, somehow I just knew it was wrong. That's I can't say exactly why or how, other than I'm a fairly intelligent person, and I couldn't see a real reason for it. You know, I mean, why? That was my question to myself. Why is this happening?
Right, but you said that you did not know that black people were being severely mistreated. But you also said you were around, it was just a part of the culture to be constantly around white people who were saying racist things. And I'm saying if you're around all the time, if you're around white people who are saying racist things about black people all the time, how do you not know black people are being mistreated?
Oh, I knew they were being mistreated. I'm talking about some of these horrible things that happened, you know, like lynchings and, burnings and castration, and, God, it was horrible, and those things weren't talked about, okay?
It's even that, like when I look at your book.
Excuse me?
When I look at your book, Mr. Bain, that is so interesting because you have so many scenes. In fact, I'm on page 146 and 147. I'll just read it, and then I'll make my thought based on what you just shared. All right. Excuse me. I want to make sure I read enough to get it correctly. Okay. All right. See if you can get in contact with whoever's in charge of the rest of those miserable, death-dealing bastards. Make sure they know we got plenty of prisoners. He grinned, showing his 2 front teeth with diamond-embedded initials, CB for Church of Blacks, and make damn sure them whiteys know how many women we got and what we got planned for them if we don't get no cure. Qualoof was well aware of the prevalent bias of white men when they thought of their women having sex with black men, and particularly prejudiced were Southern men, which he figured many of the opposing force would be. This was Atlanta, after all, and the Army had always had a higher proportion of men from the Deep South than from other parts of the country. He showed his teeth again. Just let him hint at rape and see how fast they rolled over. This is page 146 and 147. This sort of scene and this conflict and tension around a potential rapist, gold-toothed black male is so prevalent in the book that I feel like that had to be a part of what you were hearing. You said in the book that particularly in the South was this constant threat and in the psyche of white people that this threat of the raping black male. And it's all over your book. So I got to think you picked this up. Whether you picked it up directly, indirectly, it's all over your book. Do you think that's accurate?
Actually, I learned about this after I was grown. I didn't realize this as I was growing up, not in a conscious fashion anyway. But yes, that was, according to all the histories I've read, that was a prevalent feeling amongst whites of the time. And they did some horrible things to blacks who just spoke to a white woman, for God's sakes. Some of it is just still hard to believe reading it.
Wow.
Also, let me get back just a minute to this book, The Warmth of Other Suns. That's the title of the book, and it was written by a woman who researched it thoroughly, and it covers the period from 1915 to 1970 or so of the migration from blacks out of the South and to the North and to the West. And during the book, she described some of the reasons they were trying to get away from the South. And those were some of the very reasons there that they had to walk on tiptoes, so to speak, anytime they were dealing with whites. Just any sort of incident could raise a mob just in a second. Now, mind you, I didn't know this as I was growing up. I grew up in the segregated culture, but I never heard such things like that, okay? I had to read it in histories after I was grown. And after I was grown and went into the military, the military is a good example of an integrated culture that functions fine for the most part. And I liked the military. That was one of the reasons I liked it. However, I can see now that I'm talking to you that I did probably do too much stereotyping. However, think of what the media and the fiction, and I read a whole lot of fiction. You know, I read detectives and lawyers and other types of books besides science fiction. And the media also sort of stereotypes blacks without, I don't know if they mean to or not, but they do.
I agree.
What can I say?
I agree wholeheartedly. I would just say that I see a lot of the same stereotypes that I see on television and in movies that I've seen for the last 100 years. I see them in your book. I think you wrote and said that you were doing this, consciously to make people think about these issues. But like I said, I think the character Fridge, that would be the example I would use, that he's totally objectified. He has become a kitchen appliance and an homage to a football player, which is kind of distressing that that's the way that white people can feel comfortable accepting and being affectionate with black people. If they are an athlete, someone that can serve them food, that's what the refrigerator does, serve you. At any rate,
well, that was really the furthest thing from my attention, from my intentions. As I said, in the military, people give each other nicknames. Have you been in the military?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, in the military, people give each other nicknames like this. And it's not derogatory in any way at all. But a big black man might be called Fridge, after the football player became famous. And it would be a term of endearment rather than a derogatory statement. And it wouldn't be an attempt to stereotype either. It was just the way people talked back and forth. And there was no prejudice in the terms, and I thought that was what I was doing in the book. Now, apparently, some people are drawing the wrong conclusion, but for the most part, all the fan mail I got on the book was very favorable, and I got quite a lot of fan mail from blacks as well as whites, and they said, yes, this was a great book, and it should be read by a lot of people, simply because it goes into things that a lot of people don't even want to talk about.
I can understand why white. I'm sorry. Did you have something else?
Yeah, you have to speak up just a little bit.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I can understand why white people would like a book like this in a system dominated by white supremacy, and I can even understand to some degree why a significant number of black people might also, enjoy a book like this, because most black people are confused about racism. But just little things, like it stood out to me, number one, in this book, we're spending most of our time focused on Doug and June. This is a white man and a white woman. They end up getting married. In my opinion, it is a love story, really, that's just centered around this conflict of all the black people dying. And as a black person reading this book, I found that it was very suspicious to have a love story at the center of genocide, the global genocide of the black population. It seemed, I almost want to say, I had to think, does this seem appropriate? Like, this is almost like in the background. Like, the main thing is these white people hooking up and getting married and having a child. The background to all of this is just, oh yeah, all the black people are dying, and gold-toothed black people are running around raping white women or looking for the opportunity to do so. Why did you decide to have a love story be such an integral part of this book?
Well, actually, I think that that particular part of the book helped carry it in a way. There's no reason why I shouldn't have that I can see. And it's people meet and they fall in love and get married, and in a lot of times it is in the context of they do this under circumstances of conflict. I saw nothing at all wrong with it, frankly.
Very interesting. I didn't say anything was wrong with it. I just said it stood out to me as a black person reading a book about something that is a real possibility, that you are very upfront about saying this is serious, this could happen in the very near future. If we're really serious about that, just for me as a black person reading this, for that issue to seem like from time to time it's just background for a love story between a white couple with Doug, who I think is racist, based on this scene at the beginning of the book. I'm basically watching characters that I think are racist or helping out. It's seeming like you don't even know how many people are connected with this plot for how this disease was spread all across the planet. And I'm watching these white people basically hook up and have sex, get married. It's got a pretty detailed love scene, a sex scene with these two. It just, as a black person reading it, it really stood out to me. Like, wow, I feel like it's almost, the genocide of black people is almost serving as an aphrodisiac, Viagra, if you will, for these white people. And you said that the love story helped push the narrative. So that's interesting.
It was part of the narrative, yes. And you have to remember now, this is a fiction. Okay? I didn't try to write a nonfiction about this. I wrote it as fiction, so people would be interested in the book, so people would read it and think about it afterwards. And I got a lot of comments along those lines. Yes, I enjoyed the story, but it made me think.
Very interesting. Even that is strange to me. someone would enjoy a story about the genocide of the black pop. I mean, that is just, it makes perfect sense in a system of white supremacy. I said, I'm not surprised that a white person would read this book and enjoy it. And I'm not even surprised that non-people would read this book and enjoy it. I'm not surprised at all. I wanted to ask you, this is on page 121. I thought this scene was just, it was pretty incredible. And I wanted you to kind of share your thoughts on this page. This is from 121. It says, oops, I lost the page. Sorry, gang. Okay, this is the beginning of chapter 15. Emily Bailey's black face showed a patina of perspiration under the harsh camera lights. Her speech to the United Nations Assembly had gone over about as well as she had expected, perhaps better. She had been interrupted only 3 times by shouts of violent disagreement and outright disbelief. At the end, there was only a smattering of applause. She didn't blame the delegates for their less than enthusiastic reception because she didn't believe half the words she had just spoken herself. As she stood before the podium, ready to take questions, she wondered again why she hadn't simply resigned, or better yet, disclaimed some of what she had been ordered to say. In the end, she had decided to go along. If she hadn't, she would simply have been replaced and someone else put in her place to make the same speech. And she thought she very well might have been permanently silenced, and her death attributed to this virus. Her newly appointed aide sat behind her, a constant reminder of how extensive were the powers granted the president under martial law. He was an agent of the Homeland Security Council. There to be sure she said what she was supposed to, and to let her know that the surviving members of her family could be locked up indefinitely without charges if that was what it took to keep her in line. Emily doubted that much would get done in any case. Most countries had a percentage of blacks and dark citizens and were busy at home, just like the United States was. She could look out over the chamber and see that almost every seat was filled, but she knew that some of those ambassadors no longer served effective governments. In some of their countries, there was no government left at all. Phrases from the speech she had just given were still running through her mind. Demand that Israel cease all offensive operations immediately. Stand ready to offer unconditional assistance to the beleaguered continent of Africa and all the other areas afflicted by the virus. No territorial ambitions in Africa, nor designs on the Arab world. Stridently deny providing assistance to Israel in carrying out their airstrikes. Must put our own house in order. Deny in the strongest possible terms that the United States government has anything whatsoever to do with instigating the virus. The proof should be apparent in the fact that our country is also suffering grievously from have no knowledge concerning the new virus that has cropped up in the Middle East. That statement had been inserted into her speech at the last moment as news of the new virus became public knowledge. I thought this was really interesting because it showed, in my opinion, showcasing how you can have a non-white person who's just rolled out to say things and make it look nice. Why did you include this particular scene in your book?
Well, if you really want to know, I thought of Colin Powell when he made his speech to the United Nations. He was saying essentially what President Bush and the President Bush's advisors, our cabinet, had asked him to do. And I personally think he probably didn't believe everything he was saying, but he was loyal to the office of the president, if not necessarily to the man. And he was doing his best in probably what he thought was an intolerable situation. And that's where the idea for this other speech that's in the book actually came from. And if anybody thinks that some of our spokespersons don't say things that they don't believe, they're living in a different world, because they do. Our government lies, frankly. If you just want to put it bluntly, in many cases, our government lies. And I wanted to point that out in the book, and that was a good way to do it, I thought. Or do you not agree?
Oh, I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was brilliant. Really stood out. I thought it was an excellent illustration. Excellent illustration. Wow. Actually, I'll double check. Justice, do you have any other questions you would like to ask Mr. Bain?
I heard you say you wrote Melanin Apocalypse as a warning, quote unquote, for non-white people. What else do you do consciously to get rid of the system of white supremacy?
Oh, that's a good question. One way to get rid of it is just to be patient and wait about 50 years, and the whites are going to be so outnumbered in America that they won't be able to feel or to act on their feelings of supremacy, because they'll be outnumbered.
I just thought to hear your view, not anybody else's, just yours.
That is my view. All right.
Because you were saying they and, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that is my view, okay?
Okay.
That's one way to get rid of the attitude of white supremacy, is just to wait, because it's going to go sooner or later. Simply because, in America anyway, it's going to go, simply because eventually the wealth is going to gravitate towards non-whites, as is the population. For what we can do today, I'm not really sure, to tell you the truth, other than to set a good example. And in my own associations with everybody, I try to treat everybody equal. And I'm not a speech maker or a crusader or anything like that. I'm a very quiet person, and I write books. And sometimes I write a book for a specific person, a specific purpose, as I did with the Melanin Apocalypse. But I don't do that very often. Mostly I just try to write a good story. And I tried to make the Melanin Apocalypse a good story, and I think I did. I think I made it a very good story. As a matter of fact, I think it's one of my best books. Something I wasn't aware of, and I'm glad this was brought to my attention by Gus, is that I do believe now that I did do too much stereotyping of blacks in the book. However, I have to say that the scenes I wanted to describe, I just about had to do some stereotyping. But back to your question, how do we get rid of it? I don't think we can completely. Do you? I think a lot of it is just, as I said right at the beginning of the program, it's part of our evolution, and it can be changed to a certain extent by cultural assimilation, but some of it is just always going to be with us, whether you're a black person, a white person, or an Arab, or a Jew, or anybody else, any kind of a person that's different from others. You're going to say, these other people are inferior to me. You might not say it, but it sits there in the back of your mind. It's part of our evolution. And I don't know that this will ever go away. It will change its form. It will change, as I said, given 50 years, it'll be topsy-turvy. You know, the blacks will be the ones that are feeling superior because they've got the money and the power. Not necessarily the blacks, but the colored people of color, you know, all over America. But no matter how hard a person tries, I don't think they can completely rid themselves of some bit of prejudice, because it's just part of our evolution. Strangers are dangerous. Strangers keep away. You know, strangers, we're the people. Everybody else are barbarians. There was a phrase in one of Shakespeare's plays that I can't quote it exactly because I don't remember exactly, but one character was saying to the other, you have to pardon him. He's a barbarian and thinks that his way of doing things is the rule of law, or something like that. Okay? In other words, everybody belongs to their own group, and they're going to feel a little bit different about any other group. It's part of the human nature, and whether we'll evolve out of that or not, gosh, I don't know. It would be nice if we did, I think. In fact, it would be great if we did. But whether we will or not, I have no idea. And I'm not saying that the very, very bad parts of the feeling of supremacy won't be ameliorated, and they have been to quite a good extent in America. Some of it had to be forced, but it got there. Does that answer your question?
Yes. It's going to go away because non-white people are going to make racism, white supremacy go away. Gus, the listeners, keep that in mind that he is a quiet white male. It seems like you put a lot of unrealistic images on your books. Why do you do that?
What do you mean by unrealistic images?
Not real.
I thought everything in the book was realistically possible, which is what science fiction is, by the way.
I'm meaning like on the cover.
Oh, on the cover?
Yeah.
Well, getting back to the cover, I had nothing to do with the cover. Okay? That's the artist there that did the cover. And what he was trying to depict, I believe, and I could be completely wrong here, I believe he's depicting a black man in the agony of either sickness or horror at what's happening, or some other form of agony. Certainly his expression is an agonized one. And I think probably the artist was trying to make that one man's face there represent all the blacks who were thinking that they were going to die from this inflicted disease. And I could be completely wrong because I'm not the artist. I didn't do it. I had nothing to do with the might be interesting to contact the artist and see what he thought, or she. I don't even know if it's a male or female, or black or white. No idea.
Are you aware of white people who study so-called outer space, withholding constructive information regarding what they have learned while studying so-called outer space?
No, I'm not aware of anything being withheld. Are you?
I'm sorry?
I said I'm not aware of any information being withheld. And I asked if you were. I'd be interested in knowing if it is.
I don't know. I'm not really aware of what is in outer space. Yeah. I don't study that.
Oh,
what?
I'm interested in why you brought that particular question up.
Well, because you study science.
Yes, I don't study science. I'm not a scientist. I've always been interested in science, but and I read a lot about science, but I'm not quite smart enough to be a physicist or a astronomer or whatever. But I love to read about science. That's how the civilization is progressing.
What are some?
I think we're getting pretty close to the time when questions are going to be called in, aren't we? And I had something here I wanted to say that's not necessarily connected with the book, but I think it's a calamity for America, and that's our drug laws. They're stigmatizing so many of our young people, and especially blacks, way out of proportion to their numbers. And this goes on their record, keeping them from getting good jobs and so forth. And these drug laws are horribly destructive to our society, I think. I just wanted to get that in.
Justice, do you have any more questions?
I might say something else here, too. My wife, Betty, and I were talking just the other day after we'd started reading this book I mentioned, The Warmth of Other Suns, and we both agreed that in America, even today, that blacks have a harder time with just about everything, employment, wages, trying to get ahead, being singled out for drug laws, these drug laws being sentenced for the same thing that a white person might get probation for, and it's prevalent in America that blacks have to try about twice as hard as whites to accomplish the same goals, and we both believe that, and we both think it's wrong, but I'll swear I don't know how to change it.
What are some ways of how to get informed? What are some ways of how to get information from white people and then pass the information to non-white people?
Well, I'm not really sure about that. One good way is, actually this is the opposite, passing from black persons to whites. And that's books such as The Warmth of Other Suns that tells whites a whole lot of things they probably never realized were happening. So far as getting information from whites, gosh, I don't know. I'm not a sociologist. As I said earlier, I try to set a good example in my dealings with everybody, no matter what their color or religion or whatever. I don't know what else I can do.
Would you please explain how racism, white supremacy is practiced by white people 24/7?
No, I don't think so. I don't think prejudice against by white persons is practiced 24/7. No, I don't think so. It's certainly practiced, though.
I mean, like, can you explain how racism, white supremacy is practiced every day? How?
How it is?
Yes.
Well, I thought I just described that. There's inequities in the sentencing laws for crimes. There's inequities in hiring. As I said, my wife and I both agreed when we were talking about it that blacks just have a harder time than whites accomplishing the same goals. And I don't know what to do about it, to tell you the truth as frankly as I can, other than setting an example myself. Now, I ran a business for 20 years right here where I live. I ran a choose and cut Christmas tree farm, and when I did my hiring, I just tried to hire the best young men I could get, and I cared less about their color. I wanted people that did a good job. I don't think anybody is stupid not to hire people on that basis, but people do.
What do you think needs to be done in order to balance the power white people have compared to non-white people?
Well, I think we've gone about as far as we can with the laws, and other than that, all I know is just time for the laws to become part of our culture rather than part of the legal structure. And again, time will take care of a lot of it, just like time has taken care of slavery, time has taken care of the Jim Crow legal segregation, and time will take care of the inequities in wealth and hiring and so forth. I'll give you a good example of this right now. I can go to the VA hospital in Houston, and you'll find that place right there is staffed by about 90% blacks. Because when blacks get into a position where they can do some hiring, when it comes to a choice between a black and a white, guess who they're going to hire? I don't need to tell you that, do I?
Who do you know?
As I say, power has shifted. It hasn't. It will shift some more. As for me personally, I just don't know anything else I can do other than what I've already done. I've written a book that I thought might stimulate some minds to think about things that they maybe don't ordinarily do. And I try to set a good example. And other than that, I really don't know anything else to do. I'd be always glad to take advice.
Who do you know that practices racism, white supremacy better than you?
I don't know anybody. I don't get out hardly at all anymore. I don't know anybody that practices racial supremacy here. I read about it sometimes. Good God, my wife is from Jasper, and you know what happened in Jasper, don't you? Jasper, Texas? I'm sure you read about that.
Yeah, I don't know about that person, but I don't have any more questions. Go ahead, Gus.
Well, it's been very interesting talking to you.
I'm going to hit the phone lines. I have a couple more questions. I guess to go back to the stereotyping, what you call stereotyping, I really want listeners to think about that, because that's critical. That kind of goes back to the very first point that I raised, that I can easily see how someone could conclude from reading this book, this person does not like black people. The person who wrote this book is probably a racist. I could easily see how someone could conclude that, because of the stereotyping of black people as looters, gold teeth, hoodlum rapists. And I want people to keep in mind, this is supposed to be a book about raising awareness of racism and the dangers. Hey, this could go chemical and biological warfare, 21st century. I mean, this could get really bad. This is serious, that in an effort that is supposed to be against racism, we have an abundance of the same old racial stereotyping, white supremacist imagery and stereotyping of black people. And I want people to think about that. I want to read this passage, because I think that really is what I take away from this more than anything. That the exact message that comes across in the book from so many different characters who are laughing and joking and are happy, or at least they're not concerned about black people dying off in massive numbers, or even if all black people were to die off. You have so many characters who say, hey, I don't care, that would be great, I'm tired of them anyway, I don't like them anyway, who cares? That's the feeling that I get, because there's so much stereotyping of black people.
Well, don't you think that if something like this should happen, you wouldn't have plenty of people who actually would think that way?
I certainly do. I certainly do, and I appreciated the honesty. The honesty. Hang on one second.
Think about these things.
I totally understand, but I want to make sure I'm very clear about what I'm saying. While making an effort. Hang on. Let me finish, please.
Okay,
I want to make my point, and then I'll allow you to respond. That this is serious, and there would be a lot of white people who would have that exact attitude. Black people are dying off. Hey, my lucky day. I got my greatest wish answered. I know that there are tons of white people who think that way. I think that should be discussed, because I think a lot of black people are confused about that. However, I think it really shows the depths of racism that for a white person to make an effort to call serious attention to the problem of racism, in that effort, they end up ridiculing black people over and over and over. And this is just page 55. I just want to share this directly from the book so people can get an idea of what I'm saying. Doug, that's the same character that you shared some of your childhood experience. Doug stood on the brakes and twisted the steering wheel. His vehicle slid sideways, narrowly avoiding another car speeding recklessly in the other direction. He got the car into reverse gear while hitting the switch for the driver's window. It came all the way down automatically. Looking backward, he saw figures emerging from another car. Its occupants had been waiting at a side street for anyone with a white face to pass. He thought some of their gunfire must have been meant for him. If so, they had missed, but raked June's car with a row of bullets, hitting the hood and side window and blowing out a rear tire. He backed quickly, but not quite fast enough. A black youth was already pulling the door of June's car open. She was screaming. Doug stopped, jumped from his car, and yelled. The youth behind the one trying to yank June from the vehicle whirled and fired. Doug dropped instinctively as he saw what the boy intended, and had his own little automatic in his hand as he hit the ground and rolled, with chips of concrete and asphalt chasing him. He raised his pistol and fired once, twice. The young black man fell. The other tugged at June harder, not realizing that his companion had been shot. He staggered backward with a piece of June's blouse in his hand and tripped over the sprawled body of his cohort. Cursing, he drew a short-barreled pistol and fired wildly in Doug's direction. Still lying prone, Doug aimed and shot once. That was enough. His bullet punctured the youth's trachea, just below his chin, and shattered the vertebrae behind it. He dropped, with blood spurting from his throat in a red fountain. Doug ran forward while trying to look everywhere at the same time. He ducked his head and peered into the driver's compartment of June's vehicle, dreading what he might see. June uttered a short scream and shrank away from him. Then she saw who it was. This is page 55. I would submit, in a book that's supposed to be about the genocide of all the black people on the planet, you just have a lot of passages in this book that would totally justify any sort of maltreatment of black people because of passages like this. Your thoughts, Mr. Bain?
That wasn't the intention at all. The scene that you described is one that I wrote. Red. Yeah, the scene that you just read is one that I wrote to give an example of what would happen during a riot like this. Okay? And that's all that it was as far as I'm concerned. I don't see any stereotyping in that scene at all.
That one?
It's just, my golly, wouldn't you feel like that if you thought that the government or white supremacists had caused all this horror to black people? Wouldn't you feel like rioting and killing whites? If I were a black, I sure as hell would. If that had happened.
Well, as a black person reading this story, I certainly can understand why black people feel like right now, not just in your book, however, in your story, you don't sympathize with the black people. They're gold teeth wearing rioters and looters and fridge. You don't sympathize with the black people. The characters that I am sympathizing with is Doug and June. Those are the two characters that I'm sympathizing with and following because of scenes like what I just read, where black people are murdered, black looters are murdered in cold blood, and Doug and June are able to get together. It's exactly what I said. It's like the death of black people is like an aphrodisiac for white man and white woman, racist man and racist woman. It's the exact scene I just read. It's what I just read.
Well, again, it was certainly not my intention to do this. That scene there, as far as I'm concerned, that was simply a description of what might happen to a person getting caught in the middle of a riot, where blacks are rioting because they're mad as hell. They're terrified. They want to do something about it, and they don't know any other thing to do. That's what would happen in a case like this, I will say this much. Now, I can't possibly write a book and put myself in the place of a black character because I'm not. You see what I'm talking about? I can't possibly do that because I don't have the experience for it. I haven't been treated like that other than once we got to the very, very lowest level of the society, before my folks broke up, we were referred to sometimes as white trash, but that's about the extent of it. I mean, we were so poor that I'd hate to even describe it. I did describe it in my autobiography.
Wow. I'm going to see if any of the folks that called in have questions. One question. Everybody that's on the line, one question, because a lot of people called in. Person who called in, if you could be as concise as possible, I would appreciate it, and keep the background noise to a minimum. Thank you. Person who called in, 8962. Did you have a question? Person who dialed in, 8962. Did you have a question? Alrighty. Person who called in, 5827. 5827. Did you have a question?
Yeah, this is Thomas calling.
Greetings. Good to hear from you, sir.
Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation. I did have a question for the author. Do you like some of your material? I know a lot of times authors draw from tidbits of information that they have or things that they've read. So, for instance, there's a certain group of people who possess resources and wealth that feel like the earth is overpopulated. So the very first targets they would probably look at is a place like Africa. So, do you feel like this is just fodder for those people, and this is how they justify their agenda so they can control more of the earth's resources?
I'm sure some people feel that way. I certainly do.
Person who dialed in, 9737. 9737, did you have a question?
Yes, greetings. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, good evening. I'll keep this as brief as possible. You stated that you are not a racist and that your book, The Melanin Apocalypse, was a response to White Odyssey. And would you consider yourself a well-read person? Because you paraphrase Shakespeare.
Yes, I think I'm a well-read person.
Okay, that goes to my question. Your book, The White Odyssey, was that in any way, shape, or form a reference to the actual Odyssey or the supposed Odyssey Iliad? And if so, are you aware that that particular series of poems or poetry was regarding it was for motivation during a war, to motivate a group to riot? And since you said that the White Odyssey was an answer to Melanin Apocalypse, how could the two be the same, where blacks were dying or being murdered off in one, and whites were seeking to get revenge on blacks in the other, apparently? That's that part question. And the other question is, real quick, are you aware of many pseudo-humanitarian efforts of white authors like Aldous Huxley and George Orwell, and directors like D.W. Griffith, and researchers like Margaret Sanger, whose seemingly innocuous or humanitarian contributions to the world actually became realities and ended in the death of black people? That's my question.
Okay, well, that's pretty complicated here. Let's take your first one first. I wrote The Melanin Apocalypse first. And then after I had completed that book, I thought that I probably should write another book that was the complete opposite of The Melanin Apocalypse, where white people were on the very bottom of society and were treated worse than blacks were in the old legal segregated South. It was just I wanted to give white people an idea of what it might be like if they were on the other end of it. Okay, it had nothing at all to do with the Odyssey of historical writing. Nothing whatsoever to do with that. And it takes place quite a bit into the future. but it was written as an sort of an antithesis of the Melanin Apocalypse.
The person who called in from a blocked number, did you have a question, person from a blocked number?
Yes. Greetings and good evening to all. I would like to ask the guest, do you believe that white people use and develop science fiction to support and maintain the racism, white supremacy on a global level? And do you believe that all white scientists are using their knowledge to support and maintain racism, white supremacy on a global level?
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, science fiction authors are some of the most liberal writers there are so far as writing about race. Science fiction authors were portraying blacks as completely equal members of society as far back as I started reading science fiction into the 50s. Absolutely not. And as far as, what was the other question quickly?
I'm actually going to, because I said one question per caller, and I didn't get the other person's question, so I'm going to keep it at one per caller, because a lot of people called in. The other person who dialed in from a blocked number, did you have a question for Mr. Bain?
Yes, I do. Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Greetings, Gus, Justice, the other callers in the Cubs family, as well as to the guests on the line. I was following your, you were speaking of when Justice had asked you a question about prejudice, and you were saying that there were prejudice as far as you were concerned. There were more prejudice within a religion than they are between, for instance, between black whites or blacks and non-whites. And what I would want you to ask you were, who set up the religious system? Was this set up by Europeans or people who classify themselves as white that set up their religion system?
I don't quite understand your question there. What I did say was that racial prejudice is by no means the only sort of prejudice, and that religious prejudice is more prevalent than racial prejudice. And if you don't believe that, all you have to do is read a little bit of history. The most horrible wars in history have been fought over religion. And right now, today, just take the Middle East, for example. The Sunnis and the Shiites both belong to the same religion, and they're at each other's throats all the time.
The person who called in 2654, did you have a question?
Yes, Gus, I do have a question. Thanks a lot for getting back to me on that Umar Abdullah Johnson thing.
For sure.
For Mr. Bain, you said that if we wait 50 years, whites in America won't be able to practice white supremacy because of numbers, sheer numbers?
Numbers and wealth.
Okay, so I'm looking at a situation like in the Congo. The Congolese outnumbered Leopold and his army. In South Africa, the blacks outnumbered the whites in South Africa. So I'm wondering, do you have any examples when sheer numbers of a population translated into power and wealth?
Well, South Africa was a very good example. It's not completely over with yet, because even in South Africa, whites still control quite a lot of the wealth, but that's changing, and that's a perfect example right there of a pressure that can be brought to bear both morally and by numbers. And I see the same thing happening in America. down the road. Numbers can do a lot. Numbers are a quantity all of their own. That was pretty well proved in Egypt here just recently.
Non-Mighty Wick, did you have a question?
Yes, sir. Thanks for taking my call. Let's see, Mr. Bain. Yeah, I was reading one of your books, the Human by Choice. I think is the name of it, Human by Choice.
Yes.
And the lead character, Cal Levinson, I think is his name. Did you write this book or that particular character with yourself in mind?
Well, I think authors just about always put a little bit of themselves into some of the protagonists in their books. But yeah, I'd have to say so. I put some of myself into that.
Okay, yeah, I was about to say, because he had, he said that Kyle character was into science and that he had Cherokee ancestry as well. What I found interesting, and I'll just a quick question to this, it's just that so this book, or in this story, you got a non-white so-called alien crashing down, and then he meets with this Kyle character who sounds like you said is similar to you. And then this character, or this alien, this non-white alien, looks at the Kyle character and able to tell what Kyle wants. And apparently what he wants is for this non-white alien is to turn into a white female. I just found that real interesting, and see if you want to share any thoughts about that, about you writing a story about changing a non-white alien and then to just look at you and perceive what you want, and then to please you, I think the way it was written, change themselves into a white female. Any thoughts about that?
I wrote that because I thought that was the most interesting way to do it. That's all that was. I thought it just made a better story that way.
I think it's interesting in there too. You talk about like a cat or an alien raping a cat in there too. I thought that was interesting. That's all.
I don't recall that right offhand, to tell you the truth.
It was and then something about the cat has a barred penis and it gets stuck in the other cat or something, and the cow character was falling asleep and dreaming about an alien raping a cat that he heard purring outside. It's like in chapter 1 or 2.
I don't know what brought that on. As I've said, I read quite a lot, and I have all sorts of little factoids in my mind like that, and that was just one of them that it seemed like a good place to stick it in the story. That's all. See, an author has to try to make a story interesting to people, and things like that. People are stimulated by it. They learn things that they didn't know. I've learned so much reading fiction that I didn't know before. And, of course, I've learned so much I didn't know reading nonfiction as well.
I understand. The person that dialed in, 7012, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just had a question. Thanks for taking my call, Gus, and thanks, Justice. And thank you, Yes, for sharing this afternoon with us. With anything that you may have learned from being on this show, would you consider your work to be somewhat of a satire?
No, I wouldn't. Not this particular book, anyway. However, I will say I learned something from Gus when he consistently referred back to me stereotyping, and now that he has done that, I believe I did do a little too much stereotyping. I did learn something from this show. Okay?
All right, thanks.
You're welcome.
Let's see. The person who dialed in 8962. Did you have a question?
Yes. I had a question for that author. I mean, he used the word black people and the word Arabs. Do he actually know who the true Arabs were? Did he research the word? Because it's like a double sword what he did. I mean, the first Arabs were highly melanated people. For him to not research a word and saying it to go with people that's supposed to be in the Middle East, which aren't the true descendants of that heritage, I mean, I think that was poor, really poor on his part, not to research the word Arab.
Actually, I did research the word Arab, and I've actually lived in the Middle East. I really don't know what you might be referring to here, because I did a lot of research for this book. And as I said, I have lived with the Arab people over there, and I got along with them all right, but I never was able to really understand their mindset. It's just their culture is so completely different from ours. Not necessarily saying it's wrong. It's just so different that I couldn't really understand it, and neither could my wife.
Person 2654, did you have a question? Did you have a question?
Oh, I can ask another question?
Oh, I thought
you asked me already.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got the numbers mixed me up. My bad. Let me make sure I got everybody. Okay. I think I got all the folks that dialed in. That press 1. If you didn't press 1, Mr. Nero, did you have a question? I was going to look for you, sir. Mr. Nero, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Greetings to you and Justice. I've missed parts of the show, and I have not read the book. Thank you for coming on the call, sir. I just had a question. You mentioned that you grew up hearing terrible, disparaging remarks about black people. I'm just wondering if you ever witnessed any of your family members and friends make those remarks towards black people when you were growing up.
Yes, I did. It was just endemic to the culture back then.
See, I do not see any other. I don't see any other hands. So I think we got all of the questions. Very interesting. Seems like at least you are saying that you did. I even think that's interesting too much. I would think in a book that is supposed to be about generating opposition to racism, there should be no need for stereotyping at all. We should be trying to not do that at all. But
no, I have to disagree with you there. You really need some stereotyping to make it realistic.
I guess it would not be realistic if we didn't have black people looting and attempting to rape a white woman. Yeah. At any rate,
within the context of riots, I don't think it was out of line at all, because that's exactly what would happen in cases like that. And if you put it topsy-turvy, it would happen in the other direction. As I have a couple of scenes in my other book dealing with the issues of White Odyssey, where whites are at the bottom.
Oh, yeah. You reminded me. That is not accurate. You keep saying that White Odyssey is supposed to be the antithesis, the opposite of Melanin Apocalypse. The opposite of Melanin Apocalypse. Wait a minute. Yeah. The opposite would be white people, some sort of genocide against white people, and that's not what White Odyssey is about. So it's not quite the exact opposite.
Have you read the book?
That's not true. I would love to. No, sir, I have not.
Well,
is that what it's about? Did you say? Is that what it's about? Is it about genocide against white people?
A future where white people are at the stage where black people were in the legally segregated South, only worse.
That's what you said before. That is not the same thing as a virus to wipe out the entire white population. So it's not the same thing.
No, it's not. However, the whites were being wiped out in this book simply by other means, okay?
By other. How about this? Let's read that one. I would love to read that one and have you back to discuss that, because I suspect a lot of these same themes that are in this book, a lot of what I think is just you consciously and or unconsciously writing and being racist. I think that will come out in White Odyssey too. I suspect it'll come out in anything that you write, but I definitely think it'll be there for White Odyssey. So I would love to read that and have you back on the program to discuss that. Would you be interested in that?
Well, I might be interested, but I think I wouldn't be interested in such a long program again. This is really, really tiring for me. I have a bad back and other issues there that if I came on the program again, I'd rather it be shorter.
Okay. I think we could do maybe an hour or so, hour, 10 minutes. Would that be acceptable?
Maybe an hour. Yeah, that'd be the most, though.
Okay. Well, I think it'll be, because I suspect that would be my suspicion. The racism, white supremacy will still be there in White Odyssey. I mean, it's got to be. You got a book under a system of white supremacy where white people are the victims. You already know going that this is going to be a lot of racism. So, yeah, I would like to do that. We'll see if we can set that up, White Odyssey, and we'll do an hour. Thank you for sharing your time. The web address, if you all want to check out some of Mr. Bain's other works, the web address, DarrellBain.com. If you're listening at Blog Talk, you can just click his name, and it will take you right to his website. The book we did today, The Melanin Apocalypse, and it looks like perhaps in the future we will do White Odyssey. So, yeah, that'll be great down the road. Thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us, and we look forward to speaking to you soon, sir.
I was very glad to be on your program, and it's been very, very interesting to me. And I have to say I did learn a little bit of something about it. Okay?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I learned a lot as well.
Okay, great.
Take care, good
Okay,
sir.
Nice talking with you and the other folks, too.
Yes, sir. You too.
And
Take
goodbye
care.
for now.
Good evening or good afternoon. Context of white supremacy. Wow. We're going to take a quick commercial. We'll be right back. And if you called in, please, keep the background noise down, all that good stuff. I will open your lines up, and, yeah, we'll have dialogue, context of white supremacy.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open-source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by counterracism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.
Context, context of white supremacy. Very interesting program. I want to before the people that called in, if you can keep your lines muted. I want to share, these are Dr. Welsing moments from the Melanin Apocalypse. I want to share these, and then, I'll get feedback from folks who are on the line. But you got to keep the background noise down. Thank you. If you could mute your line, that would be best. Thank you. These are Dr. Welsing moments, just 3 of them, from Melanin Apocalypse. The first one is on page 123, and it says they're talking about the white people who helped put this virus together. Why is that? Okay, people are being noisy on the phone line. Yeah, if I keep hearing noises, I'm just going to mute all the lines. In fact, I would be real cool with muting all the lines and ending the program. So if I keep hearing noises, I'm just going to mute all the lines up. Okay, so Dr. Welsing moment number 1, page 123. Why is that better? We'll just execute him. Same as those Aryan supremacist bastards. From my mind, he'll be hung by his balls and beat to death with rusty barbed wire. Dr. Welsing moment number 1. Dr. Welsing moment number 2 is on page 159, bottom of 159. This is some black people talking. You're Mr. Taylor, aren't you? Doug said. Oh, this is a black person talking to the main character, Doug. You're Mr. Taylor, aren't you? Doug said, almost sure he recognized the man. I'm the man, got your balls in my hand. That's all you need to know. That's a black person saying this to a white person. Dr. Welsing moment number 3 on page 204. 204. Dr. Welsing moment number 3. I've met the man. He's no dummy. In fact, he's brilliant. He and his staff are going to want Newman, Tomlin, and Johansson's heads on a platter. You'd better tell the president what we predict will happen if we don't hand them over. What's left of the black community will go after his balls like a shark after blood. Dr. Welsing moment number 3. I mean, there are probably, thousands of them in this book. It's a really interesting read, and it's a book I think when I was more confused about racism, white supremacy, this book would have really crossed me up. Looking at it now, it's just, it's just dripping with racism, white supremacy. In a book that is supposed to be about racism is a serious problem, we should be vigilant, we should be working against it. It's integral. You gotta have black people raping white women, gold teeth, looters. You gotta have that. You can't write this book without having that. I mean, that's the system that we have. And the sad thing is that I would have totally missed all of that when I was more confused about racism, white supremacy. I'm going to exhaust all of my talking now and then be quiet, and then everybody who's on, you all can share your thoughts. I just want to read that opening passage again. I'm trying to promote reading because he said this was straight from his childhood, so I want to share this part just so you all have a nice frame of reference for our guest, suspected racist Darrell Bain, with a little bit of Cherokee, he said. From out of the blue came another question that he didn't understand. Oh, wait a minute. I'll make sure I set that up properly. Doug, so that's the character. Doug nodded again, feeling better. From out of the blue came another question that he didn't understand at first. What you rather be, a black man or a white man? For the first time, Doug really looked at the old dark-skinned gardener. His shoes were split and taped. A much-used leather belt held up equally worn and patched jeans. His shirt was stained and wet with the pungent odor of dried sweat, and his cap was a shapeless mass. But what Doug noticed most was his color, and the way his face held a reservoir of old sadness that was never absent. He didn't laugh and sing and wear nice clothes like the black men he saw on television. He was very dark, almost black. And Doug remembered now that a lot of other people were dark too, like the woman who came to clean house every week or two. He thought of his playmates and how they were all white. He thought of his parents and their friends. None of them worked outside all day in the yards or mopped floors. He hung his head, ashamed, somehow, but his child's mind had no idea why. Yet he knew the answer to the black man's question. From hundreds of overheard jokes and conversations, a cultural bias had already soaked into his little mind. He didn't really want to say anything, but his parents had taught him to always answer when adults spoke to him. White, I guess, he muttered, looking at the old man. Me too, the black gardener replied in a soft voice. He seemed to be looking at something far beyond them, something out of sight. You go home now. Get them knees doctored. That's page 6, very beginning of the Melanin Apocalypse. I think that gives you a great window for Mr. Bain and how he sees black people. This whole book, I think, gives you a great window into how he sees black people. At any rate, I will hush. I did want to make sure folks also thought it was incredible when Justice asked him about how do you get information from white people to give to black people. He answered with the exact opposite of getting information from black people to give to white people. Incredible. Everybody that dialed in, your line is open. Ross 43 in the United Kingdom is also on the line. 8162, your line is open. And everybody that dialed in, your line is open.
Hello? Greetings, Gus and Justice, once again. And I'm glad you read that passage over, that last passage that you just read over again, that you had read in the beginning of the show. Because it as he said, it set up the whole argument. First thing he said that the gardener was not shucking and jiving. He wasn't skinning and grinning. He was a serious man. They were offended by his blackness. His color was so dark that he was almost black. So it show you the two things that white people feel threatened by the most with black people. When you're serious and the more melanated you are, it's a big threat to them. And he brought it out, as he said in page 6 of his article, about this young child at the age of 6 already is setting himself up to say, okay, serious black people and the very dark black people are people that you're going to be threatening the white race. So he has explained himself very well in his book. And also when he mentioned about as you were saying, the Melanin Apocalypse, he's talking about that people need to pull up Project Coast about South Africa and Dr. Wassam, I believe was his name. He was already making weapons, biologic weapons, to target melanated people. Some of this technology was transferred to Israel. When they transferred when South Africa gained their independence and they transferred a lot of their nuclear programs to Israel, they also transferred some of this. So they were already working on projects. It's called Project Coast, to already target melanated people to exterminate us off the face of this earth. So I believe he got some of his information from that research project that was done by Dr. Wouter, I think it's Wouter, W-O-U-T-H-E-R, Wouter Wassam was the name of the doctor, South African white doctor.
Greetings. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Hello? Oh, okay.
Hello?
I'm new, first-time caller, and I really enjoy the broadcast and program, and it's a pleasure and honor. My name is Kenu, and the reason why I had asked my question, by the way, he did not answer the question, but thankfully a caller that came in right after me, asked and reiterated in different words, but reiterated the same question, and of course he didn't answer that. This was in regards to, and I pointed out the title in that book he wrote called White Odyssey. He said he wrote Melanin Apocalypse first, and then White Odyssey second. And then you actually tried to get him to respond to that again as an antithesis to the other. And the reason why I brought up the title, no title is accidental. The Odyssey, that's why I wondered if he was well read. Was he inspired by that? And that poem was, used as motivation for war. In fact, that movie 300 supposedly was behind or was inspired by the Odyssey. So in other words, if he mentioned later about someone had asked him that he said the white population will no longer be in charge in another 50 years because of population. Well, if that is the case, based on just using a logic and based on what he said, then his books not only are a reflection, but they're actually kind of a manifest destiny or a blueprint, because he's stating that here you have a white population which is supposedly suffering and no longer on the throne, and here's their way out. Here's their great white hope, the Melanin Apocalypse. So he put the Melanin Apocalypse first and then the White Odyssey second, supposedly in answer to like the black backlash or outcry to D.W. Griffith's Births of a Nation. And that's all hogwash. It's damage control, but it's also a ruse. It's typical white supremacy to cloak what they're doing and surreptitiously use words and it's basically their natural way of using doublespeak to hide what they're doing and to try to candy coat it and just out and out lie. And he's a master of it. He's like a Bill Clinton. He's no little hick, and he might be poor, but it just goes to show you it doesn't matter where they come from, what station, they're foot soldiers or they're so-called elitists. They serve the same purpose. And his books are a clear example of what the threat is, the ongoing, ever-present threat is, and what their plans are. And it is a manifest destiny in my eyes of what they would love to do and probably are in the works of doing. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that was well said. I mean, I think part of their plan or movement toward manifest destiny is right in our face in the form of pushing the feminization and homosexual aspect of behavior on non-white people like heavy duty. I mean, when he talk about his book or what he worked with the human by choice, he took. I just think it's fascinating that part of their code for dominating consists of effeminizing their victims. Turning the males into wombless females. And under like heavy refinement stage of white supremacy, they turning the victims into white females. You got black females about a million. Straightening their hair, dyeing their hair. Tyler Perry, Medea, Morehouse Girls. My Princess Boy, all of that is related. It's happening right now.
Hello?
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree on that.
Hang on one second.
Oh, sure.
Ross 43, you have to speak up. For some reason, your volume is way low. You have to speak up.
Right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better.
Right. Good. I suspect this is a call to action by his fellow white brethren to get cracking, because these blacks and these other non-whites are they could be rising up on programs like this. You might be thinking to himself, the majority of them are confused, but not all of them are confused. Could you see the tactics he was using? He was using sophistry and deflection, and those are the key armaments that the white supremacists use whenever they're talking to a black person who is aware. So I don't know what your other callers think about that.
Did you say sophistry?
Yes, sophistry, using clever arguments, but you're just a way of deflection attention.
He was very astute in that, and trying to play on the heartstrings by acting. Well, he is aged. However, I treat the 20-year-old skinhead the same as I do the 70-year-old seasoned grand wizard. Just because they're elderly, they might not be out there doing the things, but they can do their dirt from the word processor or the keyboard and be just as damaging or malevolent, or if not worse, than the person in the street or the person in the boardroom or the person behind the political podium. It's all the same, and sometimes even worse, because it's what is written that is used to create these systems, and this particular system, this global universal system of white supremacy, it was the pen. The pen is mightier than the sword, and you are correct. He did deflect in pretty much the entire interview. He was using deflection all along. But I always point to these books and to these researchers like Margaret Sanger or like D.W. Griffith or like Aldous Huxley. All of these things, and George Orwell, all of these things have come to pass or are coming to pass, and they use these as, like you said, a call to action. They're not innocuous, harmless science fiction. They use science fiction like media think tanks. It is it's like, we pass this to our people to read and to take action, whether it's the people on the street or whether it's folks in politics or your Congress people or whatever. They use this information, and it is not a warning. It might not be a warning to us, that's for sure. It might be a warning to them. And then not only a warning, but also, like you said, a call to action.
Can I just say something? Justice made me laugh when she said, "Who practices racism better than you do?" I found that very comical, and he never answered it.
Yeah, he was avoiding Justice's questions because when she started asking him lots of questions in the very beginning, he kept pretending, I did not hear you, I did not understand what you were saying. And as he said, he was trying to play this little old man routine that I am infirm and I really am such a harmless person. But normally they are the puppet masters. As you said, the Klan does not retire. All they do is they hang their robe in the closet and they just get on the phone and they orchestrate the youth to carry on with the movement. So what this man is doing or what this work that he is putting out here, he is telling them, he is giving them a blueprint within which for them to operate. Because, first of all, he's going to say that when he went to the so-called Middle East, I don't know of any place such as any Middle East. These Europeans are using these terms again, Middle East, Far East, and whatever other East they're putting out there. That him and his wife, they could not get along because they couldn't understand with the cultures or whatever. Europeans always like to come and push their way onto other people and tell them what they need to do, as if be there with their patrilineal type of attitude, as if though these people were not running their society for millenniums and know how to do it. And if people does not do it the way they want to do it, they get a little offended. I'm going to pack up my marbles and I'm going home. Like he said, he left after a year because he couldn't understand and he couldn't abide with the way how they were doing things. That is those people's culture. That is their country. You're there to work. They're paying you to do a service. You don't like it, you can go home.
And when the question became too probing, he wanted to make a quick exit.
Yes, that he has a bad back and he cannot sit up for long because Gus put him on the spot. And when he saw all of these hard questions that were asked, he knew when Gus told him he wanted to do the other book and to come back, he wanted to make it as short as possible. And I bet you the next time he come back, he's going to be gone in 45 minutes. He's not going to stay an hour. He's not even going to take questions.
Because they're not used to black people probing them in this manner.
No, he thought it was going to be a fan club. Oh, they love the book. They're going to talk about how great this book was. But when Gus started telling him the stereotypes that he was putting out there and put him on notice for it, and all of a sudden, now he cannot come back. He cannot sit around for an hour or 2 hours to take a call or to answer questions. But I bet you if ABC or Good Morning America comes calling, he's going to be able to sit up there and take all the questions and all the calls in the world on Larry King.
I found myself wondering how much of his revelations were subconscious, and I think that that's a bit of a problem. I mean, I don't think it really matters because like the end result is the end result is you're reading a book where you have to suffer a love scene with racists while genocide is going on. I mean, that's a bit much.
You're right, 909, because this man grew up in the South, as he said, and he was aware of. He cannot tell me he was not aware of lynching. Coming from Louisiana, he knew exactly when he left here when he was 17. He knew about the night riders. He knew about all of those things that took place in Louisiana. So he cannot play that innocent that he didn't know about these people were being lynched, their private parts being cut off, because in all of his books he keeps referencing the balls of men. he keeps talking about those things. So it tells you subconsciously he's well aware of what was going on and how these people took these trophies, cut off these body parts of men, and they kept them as trophies. So you don't play that dumbness with me that you didn't know when you left Louisiana at the age of 17.
Well, he contradicted himself because Gus did get him to admit that he actually first he said he was not aware, and then he had to retract that because he said that he was, but then in the whole context of things he contradicted himself, because how can you consider yourself to be well read, and part of being well read, I would assume, coming from his generation, means reading newspapers, or at least listening to the radio, going to libraries, or whatever. You have to know about the lynchings. You have to know about the perverted atrocities. You have to know about these things. And I'm sure, being a male, and having heard his male relatives brag about certain things, I wouldn't be too shocked if he's related to some who, if they didn't witness it, they took part in certain things, coming from Louisiana. So, yeah, I think that the Innocent Act, we all kind of saw through that very easily.
And he said his wife is from Jasper, Texas, where James Byrd was dragged. Jasper, Texas is right across the border from Louisiana. If you're coming from the southeastern part of Louisiana, it's not that far, because I go to relatives all the time in Louisiana, and I know exactly where Jasper, Texas is from here. You can drive from Leesville, Louisiana, and you can get over to Jasper, Texas within about an hour. So all of these areas, these people, they are known for their Klan activities, and they're known for things that they do to black people in this area. So I do not buy into it one bit about his innocence, and he was not aware of what was taking place. This man was writing. He was just changing up the names of activities and people from what he experienced and from what he knows. And the author he was speaking of, her name is Isabel Wilkerson, that wrote The Warmth of Other Suns. She's a professor at Boston University, I believe, or Boston College. So she would be someone very good for Gus to get on his show if he's interested in tracking her down to do a program.
Oh, thanks. I didn't know the author thing.
It seems like most of the people on the line basically feel like, he was conscious of what he was doing. And I just wonder how many people that, read his books, other than, that listen to the cows or whatever. I wonder if they would come to the same conclusions.
I wouldn't have. I know when I was confused, I would have probably been promoting it like, man, this guy's talking real talk, like, it's against racism. You all should read this book. And I think even when I was really confused, some of the just a lot of that old tooth stuff, like some of that would have, I suspect, bothered me a little bit, but it wouldn't have been enough for me to say, this guy's racist. Like, I've just been like, I don't like that, take some of that out. But other than that, it's great.
I've been reading for a long time, since I was a child, so I've learned from my parents, and also just from being a reader who likes to read beyond what I see. I probably would have picked up on it immediately, and then the other me probably would have gotten offended and put the book down. But then I've come across, he's not the only or the first white science fiction writer who has written very racist books. There's another author. Next time, I definitely will get the name. I picked up a paperback book while I was on the train once. Someone had left it there, and I just started reading it out of just boredom. And it was very racist. It wasn't along the lines of this particular topic or book, the Melanin Apocalypse, but it was along those same lines with stereotypical characters. And I noticed that if, this is literature, but this is also emulated and has been emulated in cinema, in science fiction and horror, where black characters die all the time, especially they kill the black male in the most horrendous ways. And it's like it's like part of the script. You see a horror movie or science fiction movie, if there's a black character, they will die. And in in all science fiction stories, it's them, meaning the white character and the white star, the female usually wins, and then all others. So we can assume that the all others are non-whites, and so they kill all the others. And if you're black, as far as human, you're out of the picture anyway. So it's in cinema, it's in literature. So the white supremacy and like spelled out in the code, that's just part of the code. It's part of the war machine. So he's just part of the war machine. It's entertainment, so he falls right in line. He did not stray from the script of white supremacy racism. He fell right in line with it, and he's perfect.
Because I could understand. I'm sorry. Please go ahead. I didn't mean to.
Sorry. I think if he knew what this program was really about, I don't think he would have come on. Because I think he didn't think he was going to be so grilled as he was.
Okay,
what do you think, Gus? Sorry, I'll let you carry on.
Oh, you were breaking up, so I didn't quite hear what you were saying. Your phone was breaking up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You want to repeat what you said in the beginning, because you were breaking up.
Sorry, I think this person, what was his name, Bain or whatever? I thought he didn't think he knew what he was letting himself in for when he came on the show. Because I suspect he didn't think we would have grilled as he was.
Yeah, I don't think he knew either. I think he was expecting something other than that. But I don't think he came ill prepared. He probably, he didn't factor on it or figure that it would happen. But having, and Justice brought this out in her questions. They know how to respond when they are questioned or confronted with the person who they see is or who identifies themselves as black. So, being on the phone, he can't see, but I'm sure he knew that he was coming on to a broadcast that was regarding racism, white supremacy, and 9 times out of 10 it would not have been something like, a white hosted radio broadcast or show. So we probably knew to come prepared in some sense or be ready for a certain type of questions, but I don't think, like you said, he was ready for it or he wasn't expecting it, put it that way.
Because when he was making his statement about there were more racism within religion rather than white versus black racism, when I asked him the question, well, who set up the institution of racism? Was this set up by Europeans and by whites? So when you were saying that there were intra-racism going on within the groups, it's something that y'all set up. So you can't just tell that the people are doing something incorrect. You set up these systems and say one is better than the other. This is all part of white supremacy.
True.
I have yet to see someone who says that they're atheists and they do not believe in God try and take over a country and destroy people. It has never happened. It has always been these religious people, either the Crusaders, the Muslim invaders, or whoever, the Jews that have always been going around staking their claim of sticking their crosses and signs in other people's country and taking it over for theirs.
I would say to the point of whether he would come on again or whether he would have come on. As far as him being a sophist, he definitely, if that's true, they enjoy this. We'll see if he comes on again, but they definitely like that type of questioning because it basically just sharpens their swords. And if the callers are correct that he is consciously practicing racism, white supremacy, it would seem to go in line because some of the answers that he gave where he just emphatically said no. Like when Justice asked him, does he think that, or in what ways is racism practiced, 24/7? He's like, no. If you listen to the things that he said, no, straight up, like no. I think I just found that interesting, and I think that he probably would come on again, just keeping in line with that that debate style and that deception, just if not just to basically refine his own self and his methods.
To see if he can outsmart the niggas.
Yep. You know, they always have to have the last word. That's white people for you. When they have an argument, they have to have the final say in everything.
Exactly. And that it was, you know, it was an exercise for him. An exercise in what? Remains to be seen, but I never give the benefit of the doubt, especially in the case of a person who's a writer, a published writer, because publishers, they don't just put anyone out there. You know, like I was listening. I'm new, so I'm kind of catching up on a lot of things. So I listened to one of the previous broadcasts on I think it was the Princess Boy, and I did some research on that as well. And that goes deep because I listened to it. The mother said she's a researcher, and then I listened to find out who her publisher was, and I realized there's always an agenda, and no one puts something out there accidentally. There's always a hidden agenda or a bigger agenda, and he didn't just get a publishing deal, and he didn't self-publish. He is put there for a reason, and they know what he does. He knows what he does. He's refined his craft. So it's no accident, and he knows exactly what he's doing. So being an unintentional racist, no, hardly. Being a racist, most definitely. White supremacist, yes. And that goes with the territory of him being a writer and part of the system as a writer. Because, any type of entertainment is part of it. So he's definitely part of it. It's just the fact of bringing these types of people out and making themselves known by making them say what they are and speak their agenda. His book speaks for itself in my eyes. It says exactly what it's about, and the warning is clear. It is someone put it, a battle cry for his people.
I mean, the backdrop of genocide being this romance, like this is what's bringing this white male and this white female together. that's ill. That is ill.
Exactly. It's like you should mate, because if you don't, and then we have the White Odyssey. It's kind of like they both go together. You can kind of put them together as anthologies, if you will. And here you have the mating game in the air of, well, now's the time to do it because the niggers are dying, and we better make hay while the sun shines. And so, he made the excuse, well, that's just part of the romance, and it's with everything. You always have to have some type of secondary story. That's bogus. It was seen, you read it for what it is, and Gus brought that out, and so did you. It's very clear-cut. Here you have, the mating game in the middle of apocalypse. No, not buying it.
Because as you said, if they're going to have a mating scene between whites, but then between blacks, they're going to have them with the gold teeth and the diamond in the mouth, and then they want to go out and rape white women. Always make it seem as if those black men always chase and want to rape white women. I don't know what made them think their women are such prizes, but I guess some of these black men who are always going after white women are just reinforcing the stereotype that black women want white women, that this is their ultimate goal, is to grow up and just get a white woman.
Well, that's why I asked him about C.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. That's why, and I asked him about that. He didn't answer that because in that movie, that silent film, which they consider a landmark film, I asked him about that. And in Birth of a Nation, they always do that. And the white woman, which is basically the most evil part of their plan, she is the one. All she has to do is say, he looked at me wrong, or he touched me, or he touched me inappropriately, and it's the cannon fire that starts the so-called white revolution. And Birth of a Nation, just like his book, started it all. And so here you have, an example of supposedly the gold-toothed thug chasing after the holiest of holies, and them protecting her honor. And this is just like Birth of a Nation. They must protect the honor of the white female, the damsel in distress, the Southern belle. It's an age-old thing that they've been using time and time again. It's the boogeyman versus the white Goldilocks, and then the white man on the horse coming to save the day to rescue his fairy princess from the evil Negro.
I mean, we've seen this theme play out in that episode of the Boondocks where they were caught in the prison. Basically, they said that we're probably going to get beat up. The police are probably going to shoot us. So we need to make some demands. What do we want? And he said, white bitches. You know what I'm saying? That was like number one on their list. So basically, the theme is that you're about to die. What's your last dying wish? Is to get a white woman.
My God. In the middle of an apocalypse, that's supposedly what. Now see, that tells you right there. If that's how he thinks. It is stereotypical, but he says there's a need for stereotypes. What was the need? He never explained that. What was the need? That's like that woman who had that radio broadcast stating, I have to use the nigger word because I have to, you show me why. Tell me why it must be used and what's the purpose and what benefit is gained by using it. She's claiming, you have to be honest. Is he saying he had to be honest? Well, where was the honesty back in 1939 or when he was coming up? Where is the honesty? The whole point of the stereotype is to send home his point that the apocalypse is necessary, because you see, even in the heat of oncoming doom, the nigger is still a nigger and is not worth living, because they're going to come after you and hurt you. So be the apocalypse. That was the purpose of the stereotypical character in his tale.
Yep, the boogeyman. They always have to have the boogeyman, just like Osama bin Laden. They have to have a boogeyman. They spread fear in order to get whatever they need to be done, because that's how white people operate on fear. That's it, period.
Coming from the cave mentality, where you have, they can't. I see it as a virus, and I listened to the Dr. Africa broadcast, and he mentioned about dealing with emotion versus dealing with intelligence, and white supremacy is definitely something that's perverted, and it's on an emotional level. It does not relate to logic nor intelligence, yet they try to bring it into a system of logic and intelligence by making it systematic. And so you're dealing with a virus-type mentality, a parasitic mentality, and a virus and a parasite, they will never become holistic or mutualistic. They will never become like the bacteria in our body that help our body. They will always want to drain the host and kill the host at the detriment to the host. So, can you turn a virus or a parasite into something that will benefit the good of all? I don't think so. I haven't seen that done in science.
In terms of timeline, we've heard, 50 years. We've heard Layla Africa, 2,000 years, 500 years. I think there's a scientific term. It's called spontaneous. I think remission. It's just they can't really explain it. It's just like when somebody is deathly ill, but all of a sudden, that disease is gone. Spontaneous remission. I wonder if any of the callers have any thoughts on that as being if racism, white supremacy is a cancer. What causes that spontaneous remission? Because that's what we need.
Well, someone said that knowing oneself ill is half the cure. Well, that kind of doesn't hold weight when it comes to this system, because as we've seen in that interview with Mr. Barnes or Bain, that he even admitted that he practiced it. He didn't come clean with everything, but we know and he knows. So in that sense, he knows himself diseased. So if knowing oneself diseased is the road to cure or half the cure, then most of the people, if not 99% of the white people who consider themselves white, they know that they are diseased. And with the disease or the mental mentality or the sickness, I don't even call it a sickness because it's deliberate, but with this type of sickness called racism, white supremacy. So if they know half of it, then it's up to them to make the next step to cure it or fix it. but they're not doing it. So in order to get to that point of what did you call it, remission, they're not even taking the step to admitting the knowledge of the fact. You know, we've been spending all these years trying to either integrate, and that was foolhardy, and then trying to get them to admit to their wrongdoing, and we see that they're delusional. You know, for anyone to sit up and not admit to the murder, rape, and pillaging of nations, and then to stand here and say, okay, this is my nation, I want to take it back from from this and that and the terrorists, that's beyond delusional. When you can't even admit to what you did, and you stand here and say that you're right, based on what? That's a sickness that, if you're trying to approach it logically, we're barking up the wrong tree, because they'll never admit to it. So again, I ask, how do we come to that point of a remission when they can't even come to half of the part of knowing themselves sick, for lack of a better word? I think the Professor Cambone cure is the best cure. That's just me.
That might be something there too. But as we said, marrying these people, socializing with them, it is not going to get us anywhere, because people. That's why it really and truly it irks me when I hear people saying about, we can have dialogue, we can have cross-cultural dialogue. We've been having cross-cultural dialogue for centuries. What has it gotten us? Because these people are not listening to you. They are trying to get you onto their team. They're not trying to get onto your team.
That's why if you notice he used the word assimilation, and my eyebrows went up when he said that. Like, what? Who? Assimilate to what? To who?
We've assimilated enough as it is right now. We have assimilated ourselves out of everything that we've ever had. So there's only assimilation that we have is to go assimilate right off the planet. That's the only option we have left. And I'm not about to go to that route.
Someone, if you're on a computer, there's some sort of sound effect. It's kind of distracting. If you could mute your line, or if you could, wherever that sound is coming from, if you could stop it, that would be helpful. Thank you.
I thought that was a new sound effect or something.
Yeah, so that was like a cowbell.
Me too. That's what I thought it was.
Point.
I mean, if we basically have to wait for, I know one of the callers from UK was saying, like, he thinks 5% are, basically aware, and Gus was basically saying that that's generous. So, and if we have to wait, then, 2,000 years probably, sounds about right. So, that's just crazy. I know there's a faster way. I've seen it in science, but and I know it can be, extrapolated into our problem. So I just want to find out, like, how did that happen? How did that phenomenon happen?
Just have to keep pushing this show out there and keep having these classes and keep telling people, getting people informed, and stop having them sitting around and listening to the Al Sharptons and all this get along type nonsense with the NAACP, because people are not going to fund their own overthrow. You're not going to join an organization that's funded by whites and expect them to help themselves get thrown out, which is what the NAACP and the Urban League and all of these other organizations, they're corporate-sponsored entities. So it's not going to.
No, I was going to say, I just think that's what, because a caller said, I wonder what he thought he was getting himself into. I think a lot of these white people that come on this show think they're coming on a show that's based around people who think like people from the NAACP or some kind of national action network, and then they have to go from plan A to plan B once they start realizing they're dealing with people who are not as confused as they thought they were when they come on the show.
Yeah, I agree with you there.
Maybe that's what's in their thought process.
That's why I wanted to make a quick exit Quick.
Well, I noticed that in most of the interviews, when whether on the C.O.W.S show or program, or whether on so-called mainstream, white, even in our own dealings, white people have been trained to put priorities with their dealings and everyday interactions, and they're the ones to let me show you to the door, or let me okay, well, let's wind this up. They always have a way, if not to put things in circular arguments, not answer, use subtext, double speak. They've been trained. It's like from, well, of course, because they're around that when they're children. They see that through their adulthood. They see that in their daily lives. So of course. And so they have practice every day when they interact with us, which is one of the bad things of integration. They can actually have guinea pigs to work on. And this is something you see, whether, on the job or talking to a so-called, quote, boss or coworker, or, in the office of a politician or whatever. They will be the ones to wind up the discourse. And if confronted with something that goes outside of what they were planning on hearing, they literally will close things. And so I noticed that also. So it's not alien to find that in an interview, and he did that perfectly. Oh, time to go, time to close up shop, Negroes, I'm done. And he kind of says, well, I will set the trend because I am Massa, and I will now close the shop. They do this all the time, and it's a very cocky, arrogant part of a racist mindset, a white supremacist mindset. Whether they consider themselves liberal or so-called conservative or whatever their bent. They're all alike in that regard, and they will play that game constantly. You'll see that a lot, where they, like, oh, it's time to stop talking to you, Negro. Now I must go, and they do this all the time. I've experienced it a lot.
He actually stayed on longer than I thought. I mean, he stayed on for 2 hours. He answered all of the hand-up questions. But I would say this, that I think people should send these shows, whatever show they feel like is a good show, send them to people, everybody, people that they don't know, even people that you think that might not be receptive to the information. I would say, because that happened with me, I was like, well, some people wouldn't be receptive, but found out that they were, so that was my mistake, and I waited, some months to do that. So I say send the show to everybody you can think of, people you don't know, everybody. Like, just send it to everybody. Send these shows to everybody.
Well, you're right, because I put it on my Facebook page, and I put it out there. But to speak to what the other callers were speaking about, the destructive nature of white people, if y'all have a chance, there's the Pat Tillman movie, that football player that joined the military and was killed by fast fratricide. And they were showing how when he was training in the Ranger, and they showed that these white soldiers, because the whole Ranger, but the group he was in was all white except for one black non-white person. And this white boy was saying, he joined the military because he liked blowing up things and he liked killing. That was what he said, this white boy. So it shows people the nature of them. These people, they like to kill and they like to destroy.
Yeah. I wanted to ask the callers, has anybody noticed, because somebody pointed out, not to let that southern drawl fool you. But has anybody noticed, we know white people are very careful with words, but do you think even the tone of their voice, they tend to switch that up when they're practicing racism, white supremacy? And the only reason I ask this because, I was listening to the president, Barack Obama, and sometimes he seems to talk like he has a southern drawl, or kind of like in a preacher type style, and
Switches up. And it's true, for someone who has lived in the South for quite some time, yes, they do. They practice that passive-aggressive type stance. And you notice it especially with the women. They always, woe be unto me. This passive-aggressive nature of them.
And I also think what what Mrs. Lawrence said yesterday about she actually said that she doesn't feel that the women suffer racism, white supremacy as much as the men. But I think they do is just a little bit, like I said, the protocols is different, so it may be a little bit more subtle when it comes on to their experience in it. But I wanted to say I definitely agree with that.
It's, as Dr. Welsing said, men carry the germ that do the annihilation. They initiate sex. Women don't have nothing to do with the initiation of sex. We can initiate all we want, but if the man is not a willing partner, then nothing is going to happen. So that is why they go after the black men. And that is why white women are used as a tool to go after black men, and the men go after non-white women. And they've always been tools in the white man's chest. So I don't understand why black men always look at them as being such innocence and such beauty. Our downfall has always been the white woman. So don't ever trust her. I don't care what this guy she comes in, she's always been up the downfall. She would always hang around and be your friend because she wants to get information or because she's going after the brother. And before you know it, she's going to end up with him. So all of these black women who always like to have them as your friends and bring them to your homes and take them to your clubs, that they're always after one thing only. They're not your friend. They don't know what it is to be a friend.
Agreed.
Amen. I was gonna say that southern drawl, or try to go into preacher mode when you speak. That is a consistent part of Timothy Wise's racist code. So I seen it. That they turn it on when they want to.
I bet he was inundated with fan mail from fellow whites saying, "Yeah, this book is brilliant. It's about time for somebody dared to put their neck above the parapet and write something like this. A call to us white brethren."
Yeah, I didn't get to hear the whole interview. I was out and about at the beginning, but I could just tell. At one point, he was describing what actually is happening, right now to non-white black people around the world, and he spoke about it as if it was a hypothetical situation, as if like. So that kind of makes me lean towards that maybe this is a blueprint for how they want to go about handling us.
Yeah, because every day they're being inundated about they're going to be the minority, they're endangered, this and that. So they have to come back with something.
Program's about to end in about 90 seconds. Anything you want to get in, should share right now. Justice, if you want to share your email, you should do it quickly.